In 1986, Hobby Japan introduced Chaosium's cosmic horror game system, the Call of Cthulhu, to the Japanese tabletop market. It was a phenomenal success, and eldritch monstrosities soon haunted other nerd media such as manga, film, and, of course, video games. Developer Hummingbird and tabletop publisher group SNES were evidently impressed, as the next year they released their own horror video RPG straight from the pages of Sandy Peterson's rulebook, Laplace no Ma. Laplace no Ma, or Laplace's Demon, was a first-person dungeon crawler in the same vein as Wizardry, a hard-as-nails haunted house adventure where every encounter could spell death or insanity for the hapless adventuring party. The influences derived from the Call of Cthulhu were obvious. Both games were set in the pre-Depression era of 1920s America. Cthulhu's scenarios were based around the fictional town of Arkham, Massachusetts, while Laplace's story begins in the equally fictitious and suspiciously familial Newcomb, Massachusetts. Both games heavily feature an insanity mechanic whereas characters faced by otherworldly and terrifying encounters lose magic points and, eventually, their minds. Both game systems encourage the use of investigative skills over combat, but perhaps even more damning are the similarities to Call of Cthulhu's pack-in scenario, The Haunted House. First-time Cthulhu players were introduced to author Howard Philip Lovecraft's dark world of incomprehensible alien terrors through an introductory story about a haunting that proved to be the work of a wizard and featured a memorable killer bed. Laplace's adventure also begins with the investigation into a haunted house and turns out to be work of a wizard and, also features a killer bed. Despite the very real possibility of intellectual plagiarism, Laplace's Demon was successful as it spawned a string of sequels, multiple remakes, manga, and Group SNES tabletop game system titled Ghost Hunter that continues to produce material some 30 years later. One remake for the PC Engine was developed by Human Entertainment, the same people who would later be responsible for the pivotal survival horror adventure Clock Tower. But as cool as the implications for that little factoid are, it's Vic Tokai's version on the Super Famicom, recently translated in English by Aeon Genesis, thank you, that I would like to discuss. The journey begins with character creation and the recruitment of your misfit adventuring party of academics, journalists, detectives, and mystics. Fear me, monsters, my band of eccentric nerds, for we come armed with books and science. Upon entering the ill-famed Weathertop Hall, the heroes are accosted by an eclectic assortment of gothic creatures. Rats, ghosts, spirits, werewolves, vampires, ghouls, zombies, and flying knives. At first glance, these enemies appear to be somewhat generic brand Halloween baddies. I mean, if you're going to steal from Lovecraft, why not take his iconic Amorpheus alien horrors? I was a little disappointed. But upon rereading the 2nd edition Call of Cthulhu rulebook, I realized that all these enemies were detailed in the bestiary, with the exception of the flying knives. Those, like the aforementioned killer bed, were ripped straight from the haunted house scenario instead. But my faith in Hummingbird's plagiarism was only completely restored when I stumbled across a Chthonian in the basement. Ah, tentacles. Now that's more like it. Between ghost busting and/or fleeing, we're a bunch of nerds, not warriors. The adventurers will attempt to solve the secrets of the mansion, which mostly involves investigating every piece of ambient furniture in the house and interviewing its friendlier spirits. Now, I know aesthetically the mansion isn't much to look at. It's pretty much a sprawling maze of sparsely decorated cavernous rooms. But that's only because there's zero extraneous clutter. Nearly every fixture is searchable, revealing either a clue, a sanity-reducing scare, or a bit of world-building flavor text. Given these graphical constraints, the bulk of the adventure's ambience comes from reading. The creepy and often unnerving event descriptions perfectly capture the dark atmosphere of the literary source material. Making your way to the heart of the mansion requires finding the keys to unlock the various doors blocking initial progression. Much of the early adventure sends the party zigzagging through the house, matching keys to previously inaccessible passages. It's a bit of a puzzle, but clever adventurers will soon uncover the source of the hauntings, quell their earthly unrest, and uncover an even bigger problem. A demon is coming to consume the world unless the heroes venture into another dimension and, well, stop it, obviously. It's at this point when you start thinking, geez, this game is really short, that the story really begins. But the party finds themselves teleported to an 18th century European castle where they have a few tasks to complete before they can even begin their search for the demon. In this particular dimension, Europe has been conquered by the real-life figure Pierre-Simon Laplace, a brilliant mathematician, astronomer, and physicist. Laplace was famous for, well, a lot of stuff outside the scope of this review, but most relevant to our purposes was his obsession with probability. Laplace proposed that with the right mathematical formula, one could predict the future with scientific accuracy, provided they possessed the required data for the calculation. His essay on the subject was later dubbed Laplace's Demon, and is of course the inspiration for our adventure. In this fictional world, Laplace has found a literal demon who could provide the data necessary to calculate his formula, and armed with the knowledge of all possible outcomes of all possible scenarios, he easily establishes himself as supreme ruler of the world. Or maybe just Europe. I don't think the game was real clear on that point, but it doesn't matter. Laplace has grown bored of an existence without surprises and sees the portal to, well, relatively modern America as his opportunity to conquer a brave new world. In the game, Laplace has a daughter, the Princess Cassandra, who fears for her father's safety. Cassandra doesn't trust the demon and believe it means to consume her world and kill her father. Now, Cassandra is another borrowed character. She's a reference to a Greek legend of another Princess Cassandra who possesses the gift to see the future, but is cursed by the god Apollo to never be believed. And similarly, our Cassandra speaks the truth. But tragically, it's the one outcome her father refuses to entertain, so he imprisons her and, well, cue side quest objective, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. While Weathertop Hall was a linear romp from door to door, the castle is more of an open floor plan. There's a few inaccessible areas, but you're not railroaded into unlocking them in any particular order. As the heroes explore their unfamiliar surroundings, they will uncover a series of quest objectives. It's imperative that they complete these missions, even if many of them are technically optional. Killing trash mobs in Laplace rewards minimal experience gains, so little in fact that it's not even necessary to fight most enemies. Provided your skill is high enough, you can generally fast-talk your way out of encounters with sentient creatures. Otherwise, retreating is the better part of valor. Quests, however, reward thousands of experience points and are the most efficient way to level up your party skills. Now, this might seem backwards. An RPG where you don't have to fight the monsters? Crazy talk. But it's actually pretty faithful to the source material. Call of Cthulhu is not a combat-heavy system generally, and fighting monsters is usually reserved as a consequence for failure. It's not quite the situation in Laplace. With the right party, you're definitely more than a match for any enemies the game throws at you. There's just a lot of them, and it's not necessary to fight them all, or even most. But you do have to fight some, as your photographer needs to make the big bucks selling creepy photos to the tabloids. The monsters in the castle take on a whole new theme. Instead of the stereotypical haunted house enemies that you're fighting before, you'll now fight a slew of mythological creatures like giants, nymphs, and fairies. This area is where Hummingbird really started to shed the Lovecraftian influences and develop Laplace into its own unique universe. Or does it? Coexisting with the human inhabitants of the castle is a race of serpent people. The game never bothers to explain their presence, and to the characters, I suppose a 6-foot-tall talking skink doesn't seem any more out of place than whatever the fuck this thing is. But for the reference, the Serpent Men were a literary invention of author Robert E. Howard as occasionally antagonists for his barbarian heroes, Kull and Conan. You might have heard of those guys before. Howard and Lovecraft were close friends who frequently referenced each other's work, and so the Serpent Men migrated over to the mythos as worshippers of the snake god Yig. Yig, however, doesn't appear anywhere in Laplace, so I think what's happened here is the Serpent Men are just another example of creatures featured in the Call of Cthulhu bestiary that Hummingbird thought would make some cool-looking NPCs. And admittedly, they do. But there you go, that's where they come from. Now, eventually the party will make their way through the castle to confront Laplace's demon, who the game never really reveals to be anything beyond a scary, tentacled, giant eyeball monster. There's some wooey stuff happening with Laplace's signet ring and a manifestation of his darkest desires, but the demon itself is unnamed and unexplained. Where did the demon come from? Who is this demon? His name is clearly not Laplace's demon, so what dark powers was Laplace meddling with? Well, I have a theory. Laplace's demon may be an avatar of Nyarlathotep, a Lovecraftian god known as the Demon of 1,000 Forms. Nyarlathotep is a sentient trickster who uses cunning, manipulation, and frequently the promise of knowledge to bring madness to humanity. because crazy tastes better. And this all fits our story. It doesn't matter what the demon looks like because old Gnarly can assume any form he likes. And the demon did grant Laplace all the knowledge of the universe, except that crucial bit that killed him. Whoops. And the kicker? Nyarlathotep is prophesized to destroy the world, just like our scary eyeball freak. Still not convinced? Well, let's bring this all full circle. In the scenario of the haunted house, the big bad wizard sought to animate the dead through a pact with the one who waits in the dark. A reference to the Haunter in the Dark, a known avatar of Nyarlathotep, and coincidentally, the story in which Lovecraft first referenced Howard Serpent People. Anyway, in Laplace, the wizard Benedict seeks to make a pact with Laplace's demon in order to resurrect the dead, his mom specifically. I'm no game theorist, but it would seem to me that all signs point to Nyarlathotep as being the secret identity of our mystery demon. Or maybe it's a big, ugly eyeball spider. I don't know. Not for sure anyway. But whatever it is, the party eventually fights it, kicks its ass, and banishes it to another dimension, which is perhaps the least Lovecraftian thing that's happened in the entire game. Lovecraftian heroes don't defeat gods, they die pitifully insignificant human deaths. And that pretty much exhausts everything that I could say about Laplace's demon, which I'm sure is more than you ever cared to know. If I had to sum up my experience in a single sentence, I would describe the game as a crude but intriguing horror adventure that unabashedly flirts with plagiarism. And my new favorite SNES RPG, because I'm a crazy person, and I can appreciate an unconventional role-playing game. Anyway, before I go, I'd like to dedicate this review to my amazing Patreon supporters. I don't know why you stick with me, but thank you for your generosity. And to all my viewers, Merry Christmas and Happy Novemberween.